If you regularly get into spy versus spy knife fights against good spies, you might have seen a certain something happen. You get into a fight and eventually end up into a backpedal. Now with less experienced spies, you might be used to something like this happening, them turning in and you getting the stab. However, against better spies, they just seem to keep looking at you, and try as you might, you won't get the backpedal stab. As an experienced spy, you might already know what they are doing, and likely be doing it yourself. They are adjusting outward, looking ahead if you will. This protects them from being stabbed in the backpedal. This looking ahead, however, can be countered with a stab called Deadlock. Deadlock is a stab that abuses the fact spies are looking ahead to keep themselves safe. By looking ahead, they are leaving the other side vulnerable. So how do you do this stab? In essence, it is very simple. Let's say you are already in a backpedal situation, just like this, doing a sideways strafe with the enemy spy. To start the Deadlock stab, let go of your strafe key and hold W. Your goal is to walk straight into the enemy spy. Because you are no longer strafing sideways, the enemy will automatically get ahead of you. As this happens, turn your mouse and keep walking straight into them. This will naturally bring you to the side he is looking away from. But since you kept walking into him, you will be sticking close to him. All that's left now is the stab. I often see spies also strafe in the other direction when going for Deadlock. Doing so will likely result in you letting the enemy get too far ahead and detaching entirely. I have seen spies compensate for this by turning early, before the enemy gets ahead of them. This is really bad. Doing so will create a moment where you basically give your side to the enemy before you actually get behind them. If the enemy stops the strafe or otherwise changes directions, you will die. Here is an example of this. My opponent will try to deadlock me by also using the strafe key. Unfortunately for them, I stopped strafing sideways just as they try this. As you can see, they basically give me a stab for free. So to reiterate, only use W, do not strafe sideways. The execution is quite simple. The difficulty is in knowing when to go for it and setting up the situation to go for it in the first place. The most important thing to figure out first is if your opponent is even looking ahead in the first place. If they aren't, then Deadlock isn't going to do you any good. If your opponent does look ahead, the next step is to figure out when they get into a backpedal with you. Or more precisely, you need to figure out when they adjust ahead. When you do get into the correct situation, it is important that you do not wait too long before starting your Deadlock. But it is equally important that you do not start your Deadlock too soon. You have to, even if just for a split second, strafe in the same direction as them before starting your Deadlock. A problem you might encounter is that your opponent changes directions before you can attempt a Deadlock. This is especially prevalent in spies that do not like to do long sideways strafes. Walls can be a great tool here. If a strafe ends up against a wall, you know the spy will have to change directions. Because of this, walls can be a great guide for timing your Deadlock attempts. I would also like to emphasize that going for a Deadlock leaves you very vulnerable. You are after all just holding W. If your opponent changes directions at the same time you attempt for a Deadlock, it'll go horribly wrong.